Iraqi city of Mosul now officially liberated from the grip of ISIS.
Secret documents that may help explain the Qatar crisis. It is a CNN exclusive.
And the 11-month-old baby desperately fighting for his life, an ethical and legal battle that has captured the world's attention. Thanks for being with us. I'm Amra Walker.
And I'm Michael Holmes. Welcome to CNN Today. Welcome, everyone. First this hour, celebrations on the streets of Iraq after the country's Prime Minister declared victory over ISIS in the war-torn city of Mosul.
Baghdad residents turned out in Tahrir Square after hearing that Mosul had been liberated. Just one celebration repeated in cities across the country. Iraq's prime minister also cheered the military win after a fierce 9-month-long battle against ISIS.
From here, from the heart of the liberated and free Mosul, by the sacrifices of the Iraqis from all provinces, we declare the great victory for all of Iraq and Iraqis. This is a great celebration that crowned the victories of the fighters and the Iraqis over the last 3 years.
Take a look at this map of Mosul, all of that green showing that the city now completely lies in the hands of Iraqi security forces. Well, despite the victory declaration, the Iraqi military is still working to rid the city of the last few holdouts.
Our Nick Payton-Walsh was with Iraqi troops as they fought to clear out those last militants.
It's like something supernatural or otherworldly's hit it. This destruction, absolutely breathtaking, and really a sign of the dust and bones that ISIS have left in their wake. Old city Mosul, the damage new, the city gone, and Mosul almost free of ISIS. Elsewhere, Iraqis are celebrating victory, dancing in the streets. Yet here, the streets are still being ground to rubble. In the last 100 yards of ISIS. A group that once held swathes of Iraq and Syria down here to their last bullets, we are told. There it is, the river that runs through the heart of Mosul that marks the end of ISIS territory in Iraq, really. But between these Iraqi special forces and that body of water that marks victory are still just dozens of ISIS fighters still holding out. American airstrikes hammer them. That's the intensity and proximity of the fighting here, that airstrikes are called in right next to Iraqi forces. They even feel the rubble landing in their faces. Perhaps because this really is the end, some of them appear to give themselves up. A sniper still there. They're welcomed. Carry him, the commander shouts. After the masks, the manicured propaganda, now we finally see what the Iraqi soldiers say is the true human and defeated face of ISIS. This man appears like he has a disability and is asked how he got here. ISIS forced me here, he insists. They fought the world's war on ISIS here in Mosul and now casually pass dead fighters. Major Salam was with us at the start and has lost many friends. How does it feel?
I feel tired. I am trying to done the operation here after all this 9 months.
Brigadier General Asadi planted the Iraqi flag, he says, on the riverbank the day before. But this isn't a battle of flags anymore, but, for ISIS, of smaller cells in survival. So, the fight went on, even as the official declaration from Iraq's Prime Minister announced victory. So it will be for Iraq in the years ahead. Nick Payton-Walsh, CNN, Mosul, Iraq.
The UN, meanwhile, praising a ceasefire in southwestern Syria, which is mostly holding a day after going into effect.
Now, this comes as Syrian government representatives and opposition leaders meet in Geneva, Switzerland. They're holding 5 days of peace talks. The U.S., Russia, and Jordan brokered the latest ceasefire last week. Now, CNN spoke with the UN Special Envoy to Syria, Staffan de Mistura. He said he's hopeful that the 6-year-long war might end soon.
With this type of simplification that we are detecting among world leaders about what are the priorities, we are getting very close to give a strong chance for ending this conflict.
An awful lot of people hope so. The new meetings in Geneva are the 7th round of peace talks attempting to settle the Syrian conflict. US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is in Kuwait to help mediate the dispute involving Qatar, one of the United States' closest allies in the Middle East.
Qatar has been isolated diplomatically over allegations by its neighbors that it supports and funds terrorism. CNN has exclusively obtained copies of secret agreements among Gulf nations that may explain how we got here. CNN's Jim Sciutto is following the story, and he spoke with our Wolf Blitzer about these agreements.
CNN has learned that Qatar made a series of secret agreements with its Gulf neighbors in 2013 and 2014, barring support for opposition and hostile groups in those nations, as well as in Egypt and Yemen. This according to the copies of these agreements obtained exclusively by CNN. Now, the existence of these agreements has been known, but both the content and the documents themselves were kept secret due to the sensitivity of the issues involved and the fact that they were agreed in private by heads of state. Now, the agreements you're seeing here, the first of which was handwritten, signed by the King of Saudi Arabia, the Emir of Qatar, and the Emir of Kuwait, were obtained by CNN from a source from the region with access to the documents. A second agreement, dated in 2014, headlined Top Secret, adds the King of Bahrain, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, and the Prime Minister of the UAE. Now, the Gulf countries have accused Qatar of not complying with the two agreements, which helps explain what sparked the worst diplomatic crisis in the Middle East, really in decades. Abiding by the agreements was among 6 principles the Gulf nations set as requirements to improve relations with Qatar in a statement released last week. In the statement to CNN, Qatar accused Saudi Arabia and UAE of breaking the spirit of the agreement and indulging in, quote, an unprovoked attack on Qatar's sovereignty.
The Secretary of State of the U.S., Rex Tillerson, when he's in Kuwait, he's in the region. He would like to mediate this and end this dispute. Qatar has a U.S. air base and a ground facility there. A lot of U.S. troops are in Qatar, and this is a very dangerous situation from the U.S. perspective as well, because the U.S. has close alliances with the Saudis and the Bahrainis and the Emiratis.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the president himself got in the middle of this, really. You'll remember the tweets he said after his trip to Saudi Arabia, siding, in effect, in those tweets with the other Gulf countries against Qatar and accusing them as much in the tweets of supporting terrorism and other things. And what we see in these agreements here, again, first the handwritten one, that among 3 of the emirs, and then in 2014, another one somewhat more formal, backed by agreement among foreign ministers, is commitments among all the nations, not singling Qatar out, but among all the nations to do things like not support the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, not support what are called deviant groups. To some, that is a code word for terrorism in the region, and not to support other opposition groups in the region.
One of the demands they made here in this document, I've gone through it earlier today, thanks to you and your team, one of the current demands is basically that Qatar shuts down Al Jazeera.
Well, that's the other thing. It's referred to in the first agreement, though not named, as antagonistic media, because, as you know, the leaders of some of these other Gulf countries and Al Jazeera, based in Qatar, they accuse it of sort of drumming up support for opposition groups, for instance, in Bahrain, but also at worst drumming up some support for terrorist groups. That's what they accuse them of. And one of their demands recently to end this is to shut that station down. Of course, a whole host of issues there, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and so on. But these Gulf nations accuse that station, backed by the Qatar government, of in effect supporting these opposition groups.
They're very vocal in that condemnation of Al Jazeera. The Gulf nations, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, but the Egyptians as well.
That's right.
They're very angry
and as
at
you know,
Al Jazeera.
As you know now, Rex Tillerson is in the region hoping to bring those partners back together because, as you said, the U.S. has close relationships really with all of them.
Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Egypt issued a joint statement on Monday saying that the documents published by CNN, quote, confirm beyond any doubt Qatar's failure to meet its commitments, unquote.
The White House is on the defensive over the admission by President Trump's eldest son that he met with a Russian lawyer last year during the presidential campaign.
Donald Trump Jr. has now hired a lawyer of his own to represent him. CNN senior White House correspondent Jeff Zeleny joining us now from Washington, and the shifting stories and versions has been quite head-spinning in the last day or so.
It has been indeed, and once again, all the questions here at the White House, or at least most of the questions, are again about what happened during the presidential campaign. Was there any coordinated activity with the Trump campaign and any Russian operatives or Russian officials? But today, for the first time, the White House is acknowledging that there was, in fact, that meeting 2 days after Donald Trump essentially clinched the Republican nomination, a meeting in Trump Tower. But the White House says he wasn't aware of it. The White House faced a new round of questions today over potential collusion between the Trump campaign and Russians during last year's election. Fresh off President Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin, it is another meeting in June of 2016 between Donald Trump Jr. and a Russian lawyer that's drawing fresh scrutiny. The Russian lawyer, known for her opposition to U.S. sanctions against Russia over human rights, said she had damaging information about Hillary Clinton. The White House on the defensive again today, insisting President Trump didn't know about the session in Trump Tower that came only 2 weeks after he clinched the Republican nomination. White House spokeswoman Sarah Huckabee Sanders said the president only learned about it in the last few days.
I would certainly say Don Jr. did not collude with anybody to influence the election. Our position is that no one within the Trump campaign colluded in order to influence the election.
But the meeting, first reported by the New York Times, is the first acknowledgement people in Trump's inner circle were willing to accept help from Russians. The question of whether they did is the subject of a special counsel's investigation and inquiries on Capitol Hill. The president's oldest son said he, Jared Kushner, and campaign chairman Paul Manafort agreed to meet with the Russian lawyer to hear what she was offering up about the Clinton campaign. It turned out to be nothing, Trump said, telling CNN. Her statements were vague, ambiguous, and made no sense. The meeting was arranged by Rob Goldstone, a publicist for a Russian pop singer who worked with President Trump on the Miss Universe pageant, hosted in Moscow in 2013. Trump's also seen in this music video.
What's wrong with you, Emin? Emin, let's get with it.
On CNN's New Day, a senior advisor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, downplayed the meeting.
I don't think anybody had to look very far to find damaging information on Hillary Clinton or negative information.
Robbie Mook, the Clinton campaign manager, said the revelation puts potential collusion closer to Trump.
What's disturbing is at each and every juncture, the Trump campaign gets closer and closer to Russia, and the connections become more direct.
All this as the White House deals with the fallout from the Trump-Putin meeting Friday at the G20 summit. On Sunday morning, the president wrote, Putin and I discussed forming an impenetrable cybersecurity unit so that election hacking and many other negative things will be guarded. That statement sparked an unusually swift rebuke. And that's just from Republicans, who blasted the president for being naive.
When it comes to Russia, he's got a blind spot, and to forgive and forget when it comes to Putin regarding cyber attacks is to empower Putin, and that's exactly what he's doing.
By Sunday night, Trump had reversed himself completely, saying, the fact that President Putin and I discussed cybersecurity unit doesn't mean I think it can happen. It can't. Now, that meeting last week in Germany at the G20 summit between the two presidents was hailed as an immediate success by the White House. But looking on now, a few days after the fact, back here in Washington, Michael and Amber, I can tell you so many Republicans, hawks and others in the party believe that that meeting was in fact not a success at all. They believe the president looked weak, and the commentary and the analysis and the concern out of that from the Republican side of the U.S. political landscape really has been striking to see here. Now, back to the issue of Donald Trump Jr., his son. He is expected to be called to testify on Capitol Hill. The vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Senator Mark Warner, is telling CNN this evening that he absolutely wants to see the president's son to ask him questions about that meeting back from June of 2016. So again, the questions of Russia are back to what potentially happened in the election campaign, not the forward-looking relationship with Vladimir Putin that the White House was trying to move on to.
Continues to stay in the spotlight. Yeah, Jeff Zeleny, we appreciate your reporting. Thank you very much. Live for us there at the White House. Time to take a short break. When we come back, G20 leaders took up a number of key issues at their summit in Germany, but no strong statement on the threat from North Korea.
Will Kim Jong-un take that as a green light to carry on? Plus, dozens of people dead, millions affected as extreme rains pound parts of China.
Stay with us for weather with our Tom Sater. You're watching CNN Today.
Hong Kong, long known as a global financial hub, but there's much more to the city of 7 million people.
Hong Kong is a very eclectic place. It's a city of big contrast.
Go beyond its striking skyline and learn what makes this place unlike any other on Earth. Experience its creative spirit and get a taste of its unique culture.
I'm Christy Loosedout in Taiyo, and join me for Iconic Hong Kong.
A CNN special Wednesday.
CNN Money, your new destination for business news. On TV, online, on the go. When you need it, where you want it. CNN Money.
The best sailors on the planet sailing the fastest race boats ever built. 6 teams battling it out head-to-head in a winner-takes-all fight to claim the most elusive prize in sailing.
It is, of course, the 35th America's Cup. And this month on Mainsail, we're finally going to find out who's going to win the oldest trophy in world sport.
Mainsail, Thursday on CNN, in partnership with Rolex.
All new Inside Africa. Unlocking the mysteries behind the continent you thought you knew. A community in the Seychelles determined to fight the effects of climate change.
Coral reef restoration is a way of giving coral reef a helping hand.
Inside Africa, today, only on CNN, in association with Zenith Bank. They know African business better than anyone else. Hear directly from the key players unlocking Africa's potential on FaceTime in CNN Marketplace Africa. Sunday only on CNN. In association with Dangote.
Welcome back, everyone. World leaders ended the G20 summit on the weekend without a strong statement on the North Korean nuclear threat.
And there's some concern that the lack of concrete action may encourage North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to continue his weapons and missile programs. CNN's Brian Todd has the story.
Impressive firepower over the Korean peninsula. American B-1 Lancer bombers, combining Mach speed with a heavy payload, fly alongside South Korean and U.S. fighter jets. A show of force to counter North Korea's recent successful test firing of an intercontinental ballistic missile. But it appears Kim Jong-un is undaunted, with nothing standing in the way of his nuclear and missile buildup. At the G20 summit, just days after that missile launch, this was about the strongest statement any leader uttered about North Korea.
Problem that something has to be done about.
At this gathering of the world's most powerful leaders, no statement from the larger group condemning North Korea's missile launch. An administration official says a U.S. attempt at that type of statement failed. There were no announced punishments or a plan of action, an opportunity missed to pressure the young dictator.
Well, it would have been good to see a united international community taking a strong stand against what North Korea is doing in perfecting its missile and nuclear programs. And we didn't really hear that. And that sends a message, perhaps, to North Korea that the international community is not as united as it should be in dealing with this problem.
At the summit, President Trump thanked Chinese President Xi Jinping for working with him to address North Korea. But analysts say to expect China to really pressure Kim to dial back his missiles is a pipe dream.
There is no way in God's green earth that the Chinese were going to do anything on North Korea at the G20. And the reasons are very clear. The Chinese are basically scared of the North Koreans. If that country were to ever collapse, if they were ever to push too hard, the Chinese would be the ones who'd be holding the bag. They'd have millions of refugees that would be streaming across their border.
And America's last line of defense may not be causing Kim much concern. Critics say the THAAD missile defense battery being tested and the long-range missile interceptors tested in recent weeks are improving, but not enough.
Despite an investment of over $40 billion in this system, it has at best a limited capability to defend against a very small number of unsophisticated ICBM missiles.
Imperfect American missile defenses, no tangible action from the world's top leaders, sending a dangerous signal to a dangerous man. If you're Kim Jong-un coming out of G20, what are you thinking?
Well, if I'm Kim Jong-un, I'm thinking keep testing missiles. I'm going to think maybe it's time, if I have a hydrogen bomb, maybe it's time to test that.
The White House is pushing back on the idea that they did nothing to try to pressure North Korea at the G20 summit. An administration official tells us they tried to get language into the final communique at the summit, condemning North Korea, calling attention to the threat, and urging more joint action against North Korea. But the official says China and Russia refused to sign on to that communique. Brian Todd, CNN, Washington.
Well, one person not impressed with the White House's response regarding North Korea is Australian journalist Chris Ullman. He is a political editor for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and he was covering the G20 summit last week.
Now, afterwards, he gave a searing assessment on what he observed, including Mr. Trump's behaviour at the summit and where the US stands under his leadership, and his comments have since gone viral. Have a listen.
The President of the United States has a particular skill set, that he's identified an illness in Western democracies, but he has no cure for it and seems intent on exploiting it. And we've also learned that he has no desire and no capacity to lead the world. The G20 became the G19 as it ended. On the Paris Climate Accords, the US was left isolated and friendless. But given that that was always going to happen, a deft president would have found an issue around which he could rally most of the leaders. And he had the perfect one, North Korea's missile tests. So where was the G20 statement condemning North Korea, which would have put pressure on China and Russia? Other leaders expected it. They were prepared to back it, but it never came. There's a tendency among some hopeful souls to confuse the speeches written for Trump with the thoughts of the man himself. He did make some interesting scripted observations in Poland about defending the values of the West, and he's in a unique position. He's the one man who has the power to do something about it. But it's the unscripted Trump that's real, a man who barks out bile in 140 characters, who wastes his precious days as president at war with the West's institutions like the judiciary, independent government agencies and the free press. He was an uneasy, lonely, awkward figure at this gathering, and you got the strong sense that some of the leaders are trying to find the best way to work around him. Donald Trump's a man who craves power because it burnishes his celebrity. To be constantly talking and talked about is all that really matters, and there is no value placed on the meaning of words, so what's said one day can be discarded the next. So what did we learn? We learned that Donald Trump has pressed fast forward on the decline of the United States as a global leader. He managed to isolate his nation, to confuse and alienate his allies, and to diminish America. He will cede that power to China and Russia, two authoritarian states that will forge a very different set of rules for the 21st century. Some will cheer the decline of America, but I think we'll miss it when it's gone. And that's the biggest threat to the values of the West, which he claims to hold so dear.
Yeah, it was extraordinary, and sort of shows the sort of international reaction to Donald Trump when he was on the international stage. There, millions and millions of views. This thing's racing around the internet.
Yeah, powerful, as he says, the G20, now the G19. Well, China's rainy season is one for the record books, as Asia's longest river, the Yangtze, is even setting new marks for flooding.
It is. Tom Sater is here with more details on China's devastating, really, rainy season, isn't it?
Oh, this is not looking good for the next couple of weeks. I mean, every year in the rainy season, we get incredible pictures and video, but it's different this year because it's the same provinces that we're dealing with day in and day out. It's more than just travel chaos. We're seeing this village by village, city by city, but usually we'll see the progression northward, and we're not seeing that this year. More on the Yangtze River in a moment. This is typically what we have in June 1st to June 10th. We should be well north of Shanghai, up near July 10th or toward Beijing. Now, the eastern flank has moved into the Korean Peninsula, devastating flooding in Kyushu and western Japan over the weekend. In fact, after 5 days of rain, it's still hampering the recovery efforts. The death toll is now up to 20 with that flash flooding, still 20 missing. But we're watching watching the western flank hang to the south, and it's been this way since the beginning of June. All of this precipitation and the thunderstorms day in and day out should be well to the north, but it's Hunan province, it's Hubei province, it's Guangxi, it's Guizhou. In fact, you'll see even back into northeast India, we've got problems. Now, we cannot continue to go every day with another 100 to 200 millimeters. Changsha, home to 7.5 million people, has seen over a half meter of rain. That's typically what they'd get for all of June, July, August, and September put together. The Yangtze River, the mighty Yangtze, the longest river in Asia, is already swollen and at its banks. We have right now 100 tributaries that are at record levels, and they all feed the Yangtze in the coming days and weeks. And it's that same area, of course, that we've been mentioning. Here's the river you see just ending north of Shanghai. 10 large tributaries, 89 small and medium ones, and they're all at record levels. This is incredible. How many times can you talk about the Yangtze having all-time record heights? We've seen some areas of around some of the tributaries that are 40 meters in depth. They've never had that before. So again, it's Hunan province, it's Hubei, over toward Chongqing, northward. Remember in Sichuan, we had that landslide. It was just a freak storm up to the north, and terrible flooding from India's monsoon in northeast India. Just across the border, though, in the Tibetan Autonomous Region along the Xigu River, take a look at this video. This is what you almost see every year, but unfortunately it's becoming more common because these old villages that, use these rivers for commerce and transportation are now continuing to erode. So it's these homes and businesses, this hotel. How many times have we shown video like this? So again, not really making it through the test of time. And with the river levels on the rise in the coming days and weeks, this is really going to be quite a threat to life and property. The amount of rainfall we're watching is still, unfortunately, in the same location, but I really do fear of what's going to happen coming up in the last couple of weeks. And we all know what happened with that landslide. Took over 140 lives up in Sichuan province. That was further to the north, where the rains are now moving to, or should be moving to.
In the right place there, absolutely. Tom, thanks so much.
Tom, thank you. Up next, the battle has ended, so what comes next?
What hundreds of thousands of Iraqis who fled Mosul after ISIS took over and since need now.
Plus, an easily treatable disease is spiraling out of control in one country. We'll have the latest on the cholera outbreak in Yemen. That's next.
A destitute single mother who became the world's first billionaire author.
I love writing.
As Harry Potter turns 20, J.K. Rowling joins me to talk about the magic rubbing off on her charity, Lumos.
Our ambition is to end child institutionalization by 2050.
She has huge ambitions and an unexpected surprise for her dedicated fans.
This is a J.K. Rowling scoop, I'm sorry.
Find out in my exclusive interview.
I've flown millions of miles, taken thousands of flights, stayed in hundreds of hotels. But on the next CNN Business Traveller, I join the largest group of travellers. The over 60s. Young or old, fit or infirm, able or challenged. Come along as we explore travel for all.
CNN Business Traveller, in association with Invest Macedonia and Macedonia Tourism.
Inside the Middle East. Join Becky Anderson this month as we explore the Islamic history of Spain. Meet the people celebrating their Middle Eastern heritage.
I have the strong intention to connect again with our ancestors.
And discover how its influence is felt in every beat of a flamenco dance, in every mouthful of food, and in the beauty of the architecture. Inside the Middle East, Wednesday on CNN, in association with MISC.
Brexit has won.
America first.
Refugees are welcome here.
CNN has the man to cut through all of this noise.
Brian Wolflisser in Washington. You're looking at some live pictures right now coming in from the White House.
And ask the important questions.
You just heard the president say this lawsuit is totally without any merit. Why do you disagree? This is an important element. Explain what you mean. I want to bring in our panel to talk a little bit more about today's hearing.
Wolf, Tuesday through Saturday on CNN.
I'm Andrew Stevens in Hong Kong, and this is CNN.
Welcome back, everyone, to CNN Today. I'm Amaral Walker.
And I'm Michael Holmes. Let's update you now on our top stories. Iraq's Prime Minister has now declared victory over ISIS in Mosul, a city that has been largely reduced to rubble after 3 years of ISIS control.
We're told the Iraqi military is still working to rid the city of the remaining ISIS fighters there. The UN Special Envoy for Syria, Staffan de Mistura, says a ceasefire in southwestern Syria is mostly holding. He made the announcement as a new round of peace talks began in Geneva.
Now, that truce was brokered last week by the US, Russia and Jordan. It went into effect on Sunday. The White House says US President Donald Trump learned a couple of days ago about a meeting between his eldest son and a Russian lawyer with ties to the Kremlin that happened during last year's presidential campaign.
Donald Trump Jr. now admits he met with the woman after being told she might have information about his father's opponent, Hillary Clinton. Amid the ruins of the battle in Mosul, Iraqis who stayed and survived are now beginning to rebuild. And CNN saw some who left return to the decimated old city, cars on roads and chickens being sold in makeshift markets.
But we want to bring Mosul down to the scale of one child, this young boy. Kurdish media reported he crawled wounded and alone inside a basement and stayed there for 20 days as the battle raged around him. He came back above ground to see his city, his home, in ruins. Now, we spoke last hour with Bruno Jado. He is the Iraq representative at the United Nations Refugee Agency. He was actually quoted the other day saying, "Whenever we receive people from there, they look aghast, like someone who has gone through an experience like hell." Jado gave more insights into what the Battle of Mosul has been like for those who lived there.
They continue to come. They have been bunkering down in basements for weeks in a situation of horror and terror. Horror because they fear that if they try to escape, ISIS snipers would kill them. And terror because they were constantly trying to survive under heavy artillery fire and airstrikes. They went with barely a miserable meal per day, so they come out in a situation of being cell-shocked, looking like zombies, basically, coming from the afterlife back to life. Sometimes almost incredulous to the fact that they managed to survive. They need shelter, food, water, but they also need to be helped to overcome this terrible trauma that they went through because of the unspeakable violence they were made to see.
The psychological damage one can't imagine, and we'll come back to that in a moment, but I want you to also speak to the importance of getting them home, but firstly, having a home to go back to. I was in Mosul in October, November. The damage there that we saw was incredible. Now it's months later. The city looks destroyed. But how important is that for them to have a home?
It is very important. Maslawis do not like to live in camps, do not like to live under tents. They are a very proud people. At the same time, those who were coming from eastern Mosul could return fairly easily because the level of damage was limited. In the western part of the city, there is massive destruction, rubble everywhere, particularly in the old city and the adjacent quarters. It will take some time for them to be able to return. We are going to support them with what we call emergency shelter kits and seal-off kits. These are kits with planks of wood that will help them to isolate 1 or 2 rooms in a heavily damaged building to live in until they will be able to reconstruct their shelter. But obviously it will take time because a minimum of service will have to be restored. It will also take time because the city will have to be decontaminated of explosive remnant of wars, which are now everywhere, booby traps and landmines. They have to be removed first before it is declared free for people to return safely.
The scale of the destruction is just incredible. I mean, it almost looks like you have to bulldoze the city and start over again. You mentioned the children, and I don't know, I met a lot of them there, and you're talking about a lost generation of sorts. You've got kids who did not go to school in years or have a normal education, and apart from that have witnessed unspeakable things. How do they even begin to recover? Are they a lost generation?
This is going to be one of the biggest challenges for Iraq and for the international community as a whole. Many of these children have been brainwashed. They have grown up doing horrible things, things that are unspeakable even to describe. They will have to be de-radicalized first and de-traumatized. Luckily, because they have been brainwashed during the time that they were growing up, we hope that it will still be possible for them to retrieve their original identity and to somehow put in a bracket, in a parenthesis, this terrible period of 3 years they went through. But it will require very special psychological care, which is not immediately available. So one of our priorities as humanitarian workers is to bring in expertise, adequate expertise in psychosocial counseling to de-traumatize these children. Otherwise, they could indeed become a lost generation, and we don't want to do that, and Iraq cannot afford to have that.
Well, another humanitarian crisis is unfolding in Yemen. A cholera outbreak is spiraling out of control across the war-torn country.
The International Committee of the Red Cross now reports more than 1,600 people have died from infection out of more than 300,000 suspected cases. And the ICRC says the illness is spreading at a rate of more than 7,000 new cases a day.
Cholera is easily treatable, but the war has all but destroyed the country's medical system. And still to come on CNN Today, could there be new hope for baby Charlie Gard?
The UK High Court sets a hearing asking for evidence. We'll explain. Stay with us. Be right back.
CNN Money, your new destination for business news. On TV, online, on the go. When you need it, where you want it. CNN Money.
CNN Supercharged. Plug into the first ever all-electric racing series, Formula E. Go behind the scenes with Nikki Shields in the cities hosting the E-Prix action. Meet the drivers racing through downtown street circuits across the globe. And check out the technology driving us all towards a greener future. CNN Supercharged. Today on CNN, in association with DHL. What defines cutting-edge investments in today's global real estate market? Host John Defterios in 1 Square Meter gives you a rare peek behind the trendiest places, the best developments, and unique projects around the world. From San Francisco to Shanghai, 1 Square Meter seeks out the most interesting places and takes an inside look at international properties. 1 Square Meter, tonight in Connect the World with Becky Anderson, in association with MR. The beauty of Asia is undeniable, diverse and intriguing, with a rich past and strong tradition. And this is Asia Now. From business and travel to food and innovation, CNN tells the stories of Asia Now.
The British High Court has adjourned until Thursday as it reconsiders a case that tugs at the heartstrings and poses the most challenging ethical questions. It involves Charlie Gard, just 11 months old, born with a very rare brain-damaging condition.
Charlie is on life support in a London hospital. His parents want to bring him to the US for an experimental treatment. Now, on Monday, the court ordered his parents to submit written evidence by Wednesday that treatment could help him. The courts previously sided with the hospital to take Charlie off life support because his doctors believe he cannot recover.
His case has gotten international attention with expressions of support from the Pope and U.S. President Donald Trump. So who gets to choose whether Charlie lives or dies? Well, last hour, Arthur Kaplan, a leading bioethicist from New York University, outlined for us some of the complex ethical and legal issues surrounding Charlie's case.
In the States, there is a strong prejudice toward letting parents make the decision in the UK, there's more deference to doctors. What the doctors are saying is there's no doubt that Charlie's parents love him, want to try to do what they can for him, but their love may have blinded them to the fact that there's nothing more to offer. We hear about experimental drugs, but as the court said today, it's not clear they can reverse all the terrible damage that Charlie has suffered. And if they're going to extend his life and he's going to suffer as a result, then the court and the doctors are unlikely to find that a reasonable course to pursue.
But, I mean, do we know for sure that Charlie Gard is suffering? Because the judges ruled that, you know, by prolonging his life, that would be prolonging his suffering. But do we know for sure that he is truly indeed suffering?
It's a great question, and I'm not sure we do. It's up to the doctors to prove that he would suffer were he to continue to live. He's blind, he's paralyzed, he can't breathe on his own, he has terrible brain damage that I don't think any drug can possibly reverse. So he's very severely afflicted, but I don't believe he's in a coma, and I don't believe he's unconscious. So the potential is there for him to feel pain, to suffer, and I think that's what the court is going to have to be persuaded will not happen.
Yeah, and sadly, what Charlie Gard is suffering from is a genetically rare disease that there is no cure for. But, you know, the debate basically comes down to whether the parents should have the right to determine what is in their child's interest. And in the UK, well, the law says that parents don't have these rights, right? You were just talking about this prejudice. But if Charlie's parents were American, they would be able to continue with that experimental treatment. Is that correct?
Well, ironically, in the U.S., the limit is money. Now, Charlie's parents have raised a lot of money by going on the internet, so they do have that. Here, parents would get a lot of respect if they wanted to try one more experimental intervention. However, in the UK, people are basically saying, look, parents don't always know best when it comes to something like a desperate experimental intervention. If it's not really tried in animals, not tried in any human beings, might just extend a life of suffering, and we're not going to give that choice. Easier to get it tried in the US, much tougher in the UK.
Clearly no easy answer on that one.
That is such a tough story. It really is.
And that was Arthur Kaplan of New York University's Langone Medical Center. Well, 4 brave, aspiring astronauts in Beijing are spending the next 200 days in what is called the Lunar Palace, but the experiment's aim is to actually, yet it's anything but a palace. The experiment's aim is to create a self-sustaining ecosystem for use in space.
Now, these astronaut students are going to be recycling everything, yes, everything, from plant cuttings to, yes, urine. While the project will track the group's physical needs, mental fitness, of course, is also going to be a big variable.
The hardest thing to deal with is, how to put it, at the moment when you sit down, once you've finished being busy at the end of the day, you sometimes feel a bit low. If the 4 of us are together talking and having fun, it's better, but sometimes you can miss your family.
Sure, it gets lonely down there. China is trying to become a major player in manned space flight with plans to put astronauts on the moon by 2036.
I'd get bored, would you?
Yeah, cabin fever.
Yeah, go for a walk.
Well, that's our time, everyone. Thanks for watching. I'm Amara Walker.
I'm Michael Holmes. Stay tuned. World Sport with Kate Riley coming up.